The third and last part of this first lecture is about how we actually build a blockchain, how we build the blocks and how we put them together in a chain. Excuse the picture, it's just a little bit of childish indulgence by me. Of course, blockchains don't look anything like that. They look like chains like this, or with multiple strands, and they're not arranged in pretty patterns, but these blocks just reminded me of a similar set I had when I was a girl. Okay, so blocks are made of transactions. These are, we've already looked at transactions in a very broad sense. Transactions, any action that changes the state of the blockchain. And in blockchains, these transactions need to be digitally signed. We're going to be looking at that in lecture 2, where the private key is used to sign a transaction to authorize it, and then the blockchain needs to authenticate that actually it was the right person who signed it, right? And this signed transaction is submitted to the network. What it does is request some sort of change of state, of which there are many. I'm often going to be using the transfer of ownership of a token, because that's quite a simple one as my examples going forwards, not necessarily in this lecture, but later on. But there are other things like creating a smart contract. We'll look at smart contracts in lecture 5. Or because a smart contract is self-executing, it sits on the chain, but it can then alter the state in the future many different times. So it could be an execution of a step in a smart contract, or what we might call a smart contract call. It could be the reward for adding a block to the chain. It could be a penalty for misbehaving and not behaving according to the blockchain protocol. Or it could be a vote in a decentralized or autonomous organization. It could be a vote in a consensus mechanism for the witness that you want to produce the next block in delegated proof of stake. I mean, I could go on. There are so many transactions. But the common thing of all transactions is you have to have these 3 things: a sender, a request, and conditions. So the sender is the person who deploys the transaction to the network, and they have to digitally sign it. And then there's the request in the transaction, which could be the token transfer or the smart contract call or any number of other things. And then there's the conditions. This could be many different conditions. If it's a token transfer, it could be the balance of your account that you're trying to transfer from. Transfer the ownership. You don't transfer the actual token. You only transfer the ownership records. The actual token is always going to sit wherever it's landed on the blockchain as a smart contract token or what else. We shall tell you more about tokens, much more about tokens as this level and other levels progress in this lecture series. Okay, so those are the 3 elements for transaction: the sender, request, and conditions. The sender broadcasts to the peer-to-peer network. The nodes, first of all, they have to authenticate to make sure they've been sent by the right person. They also have to validate all sorts of things about the transaction. And then once all that's done, they go into something called a mempool, where they sit and wait, and then a transaction is taken up by a block builder and put into a block which is proposed for the chain. And then once the consensus mechanism agrees that that is the next block and it goes on the chain, the transaction is confirmed. But because of the way consensus mechanisms work, it might still be possible to change that transaction for a short period of time. We'll see how this can be done, for example, in proof of work, and that will be in lecture 6. But it takes 10 or more blocks or fewer, depending on the consensus mechanism. You have to add more blocks, and only then is this block final. Nothing in it can be changed. You cannot alter any transaction, because that's going to change the Merke root which will change absolutely everything. So what do I mean by a Merkle root? Well, this is how the transactions are structured within. This is the inside of a block, and they're structured like this. So you start with block contains all the original details of the transaction that's been conveyed to the network, things like the sender's signature, the output of the transaction, all the conditions, and all that stuff gets hashed. So, for example, Bitcoin uses SHA-256 twice, actually. So you get the every transaction gets hashed, and then they're hashed pairwise. Every time you're going to get a 256-bit output if you're using SHA-256, because that's the internal state of SHA-256. And so this hash at the top will be a 64-bit hex. That's all it is. Oh, for 64-digit hex, 256-bit binary. So we call the hash at the top the Merkle root. It's a bit of an inverted tree because the root should be at the bottom. And the leaves, which are these hashes here, hash 1 to hash 8, are the leaves. They should be at the top. But anyway, so that's the Merkle tree structure. And that Merkle root is really useful because if you change anything in any of those transactions, say you change something in transaction 7, transaction 7's hash would change, but that means the hash 78 would change because of the avalanche effect. You change a tiny thing and then everything's completely different. And so eventually the Merkle root would also change if you change any information in any of those transactions. It's called the Merkle tree. Now, to build a blockchain, you're going to link these blocks together cryptographically. And the way that is done is to use something called the block header. And there are various elements to the header, and the most important element is the previous block address. So you can think of the previous block address as some sort of peg that, like a Lego brick that you have to use to put the next block on and the next block on and the next block on. What is the previous block address? Well, for block N, this central block here, the previous block address is just the hash of the header of block N-1. So if you change anything in the header of block N-1, you're going to change its address. So if you change the previous block address here, because you changed something in block N-1, you will change block N, and everything gets changed. If you change one tiny transaction in block N-1, it's going to change the Merkle root, which will change that block address, which will change the header of block N, which will change the header of the next block. And so everything gets out of sync. That's what I mean by using the headers as pegs to build this chain. So what exactly is in a header? There's more than in that diagram. That diagram was just for a proof of work blockchain. Why do I know that? Because they've got the word nonce here. This nonce is only used in proof of work. So you've got the previous block address. That's the hash of the previous block header, as I said. The timestamp is when the block was mined or proposed, when the block was complete and ready to be added, but the consensus mechanism had not agreed yet that this is the right block to add. And so it may be something wrong with the block, there may be some fraud in it or other issues with that block. So the network needs to agree on that block. And the timestamp is not when it gets actually added to the chain, it's when it's ready to be added, when it was mined or proposed. The nonce is the number only used once in the proof of work consensus. I'm going to explain what that is in more detail in lecture 6. The validator signature replaces the nonce in a proof of stake blockchain. You need some way to identify who is putting the block in the slot. That's how proof of stakes works. Then we've got that Merkle root, which I mentioned before, is a single hash summarizing all the transactions in the block. And then there's lots of other data. It could be the difficulty if it's Bitcoin, because that is necessary for the nonce. It could be slot information or the state root or gas limits for Ethereum. There's lots of extra data that goes in there too. Why do we want to use block headers? Well, they're much smaller, and that means that something called light nodes that have much less storage requirements can store all the block headers, but they can't store all the blocks, like 2 megabytes for every block. No way. But the header includes the Merkle root, which summarizes all the transactions, and that allows the light nodes to verify transactions, making sure they've been properly signed. It uses something called a Merkle proof. Has to, in conjunction with the full node, it just requests only the pages from the directory that you need to verify it, not the entire directory. And then, of course, we've got this mutability property, which is retained in the block headers because of that Merkle root. You change one transaction, you change the Merkle root, which changes the block address, which then goes forward to all the other blocks in the chain. So finally, how do we confirm a block to be added to the chain with that consensus mechanism? Well, different blocks use different consensus mechanisms. Proof of work, proof of stake are the ones that we're focused on, but I also have a lecture, I think it's topic 8, which is looking at proof of history, proof of authority, and other consensus mechanisms. So the consensus, in a nutshell, because I've got a whole lecture on these, right? But the idea of proof of work is that the mining nodes, that's what they're called, the block building nodes, they compete to solve some sort of puzzle using trial and error. They try, is this a solution? Is this a solution? Is this a solution? They keep creating 64-bit hexes randomly. And they try to hash that with the block, the Merkle root, and other information in the block to get a very rare sort of hex that begins with lots of zeros. I mean, you can always put zeros before a hex when you've got a number and it doesn't affect the number at all. But when you're just generating a hex randomly, you've got these 16 digits to play with: 0, 1, 2, 3 to 9, A, B, C, D, F. And each one is equally likely. You could have a 0, you could have a 2, you could have an F, you could have an A. And the chance is 1 over 16 that you're going to get one of those. And that's what I'm talking about when it comes to difficulty. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself as always. Stop it. Okay, and then in proof of stake chains, the consensus is done using weighted votes on it's actually called attesting to the block that a proposer has added. But before it gets to that stage, the attestation stage, recently in Ethereum, there's been this division between the builders and the proposers. So they've got the builders that actually make these blocks and do the Merkle trees, and the proposers are the people that put the block in the chain, and they're different. Okay, only obviously it could be the same firm, but generally speaking, block proposers and block builders are different entities, and yeah, complex. I won't get onto that until level 3 when I'm talking about maximal extractable value, but that's going to be a few weeks from now before I get onto that. Okay, so the selection process, whether it's somebody's paying me more and I'm going to take this block, or whether I just happen to win this trial and error game, whatever the selection process is, that's called the consensus mechanism. It ensures that all the participants agree on the next block to be added to the chain. See you in the next lecture. Bye for now.